4. The Bedcats. Old Paul had quite a time with the Bedcats one winter when he was using one of his old camps that had stood deserted for 30 years or more. It happened this way. As everyone knows, the bunkhouses have a certain number of bedbugs. These don't annoy a real lumberjack to amount of anything, although you'll hear the greenhorns holler plenty when they first come into camp. But they either make friends with the little beasts or they don't last long. The story is that the loggers all had their bedbugs and followed them around camp and out in the woods like dogs, some even being trained, it is said, to steal blankets off adjoining bunks for their masters on especially cold nights. However, that is as it may be, I never saw it. But it is a well-known fact that the intelligent little beasts always knew when camp was to be moved, and the night before would come out wherever they were in the habit of staying and climb into the bedding rolls, as they not to be left behind. Then when the new camp was set up, there they were, jumping up and down with excitement to greet the men when they came in from their first day's work. One time, though, they got fooled. That was the time the Indian squatting calf comes running into camp just after breakfast with news that gold has been discovered in the Black Hills. Right away, all the men tear out over the hills without even waiting to pick up their blankets. Within 3 minutes, the camp was as empty as an old maid's litter box on Valentine's Day. That night at sundown, the little bugs are all lined up at the bunkhouse door, waiting for the men to come home as usual. But they don't come. Old Paul's in town at the time, and when he hears the news, he goes, there's no use figuring and logging till cold fever passes, as it goes on a timber cruising trip. He locates some fine timber in Kansas way, and when he finds his men ready to work, he starts a new camp there, as he has already market for his lumber in the new gold towns. And, what with one thing or another, it's about 30 years before he comes back to the old camp. But when he does, he finds trouble waiting for him. He and the men get there about noon and start cleaning out all the old buildings, and they're a little surprised to find the bunks filled up with bones of rabbits and other little animals. I suppose that owls or bobcats have been living there. By night, the camp is ready, and after supper, all the men turn in early. Old Paul suddenly wakes up, hearing wild yells and snarls from the bunkhouse, and comes running out of his office to see the men clawing over one another in their underwear, trying to get out in the open. They swear that their bunks was full of wildcats, which have been crawling all over them. Now, Paul knows wildcats, and he's never heard of one that'll come within 100 yards of a logger if it has its druthers. And he can find nothing in there when he looks, but figures that, being it's day after payday, the men have probably eaten something that disagrees with them. But they won't go back into the bunkhouse, so he lets them sleep in the stables that night. But the next night, the same thing happens, so Paul decides to get his pistol and sleep in the bunkhouse himself. When a bunch of lumberjacks are scared to sleep in a place, there must be something wrong somewhere. For a time, things are quiet enough to suit anybody, and Paul finally gets a reason that I ever heard of. And Paul finally decides that the men have been reading too many old mystery magazines and dozes off. He wakes up mighty soon. But what feels like a couple of full-grown wildcats seem to have gotten tangled up in his beard, and his blanket is heaving around like he has a runaway cat show under it. The whole bunk is full of animals of some kind, hissing and snarling like all get out. It's none too comfortable there, but old Paul doesn't lose his head. He grabs out in the dark and gets a couple of the beasts and stuffs them into a sack he's got handy. Of course, as soon as he starts floundering, none of the things clear out, like any wild animal, and by the time the men come in running with lanterns, the place is quiet again. They carefully open up the sack to see what they've caught. The animals inside were not bobcats. In fact, nobody's ever seen anything like them. They're about the size of bobcats, but they've got several pairs of legs. They are covered with a heavy coat of reddish-brown fur, which is quite long on the back, and due to the shortness of their legs, it is worn down in the length of plush at the bottom. Naturally, Paul and the men are more than a little puzzled. It is not until the Indians come into camp and they find out what it is they have caught. The Indians call them bedcats, and from them, Paul learns a story. It seems that the little bugs, being left alone in camp, had to forage for themselves. At first, many died, and the stronger ones survived and grew larger, soon attacking small mice and sparrows. As the years passed, they grew fur to keep them warm, and became more and more savage, each generation a little larger and a little wilder than the one before. Eventually, they were bringing in gophers and small rabbits to feed their young. Later, it seems, they crossed with bobcats, and the half-breeds were really fierce hunters. They took to running in packs like wolves, baying at the moon and pitching to fight. A full-grown bobcat was no match for even an ordinary bobcat. The Indians set deadfalls for them and made fur of the robes and mittens from the pelts. But with the return of the lumberjacks, some forgotten instinct seemed to urge them into the blankets of the bunks, which upset the soundest sleepers. Something had to be done. Old Paul buys the Indians a lot of number for wolf traps and offers a $5 bounty for the scalps, so they are soon trapped out. I haven't heard of any quite that big ever since.